right. Well, first off, Klaus, thanks very much for that warm introduction. I think one of the things that's it's exciting and depressing at the same time as the introductions get longer. I realize I'm getting a lot older, but it's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of my experiences with you all. As you just mentioned, I'm going to give a little bit more context to my background, which will hopefully give you some further insights into some of the experiences that I've gained, some of the learnings that I've had along my personal and professional journey that hopefully will be relevant as I tell you some stories and bring this to life. I started my career, I'm originally from the US, as my accent probably gives away, but actually I started my career in Japan. My first job out of university was in Japan working for Motorola in the telecom sector. And that's actually a photo of me from my first ID badge. When I got hired by Motorola. And Klaus, you can see I did have hair back then. And from Motorola, I had an opportunity to move to the Philippines. So from Japan, I went to the Philippines and was with Motorola for about 5 years in total. And then I went off and I started actually my own business, still in the telecom sector. I started a small business to do like an audit trail for the network infrastructure that I had in the Philippines for a few years. My career then took a bit of a change, and I went into the area of market research. And I spent 11 years with a great company. Started as a company called Asia Market Intelligence that later became Sinovate and was acquired by Ipsos in 2011. And this is where my career really, I guess the international part of my career took off. I initially had a regional role in Malaysia. I then got moved into a global role, moved to the UK. And this company grew a lot by acquisition as well as through organic growth. We acquired 40 plus companies over 7 years and really built Sinovate into a global brand. And I was fortunate to be in the leadership team, having many different roles in my 11-year journey there, including divisional CEO for our customer experience practice. I was also the chief information officer for 3 years as well. When I was CIO, I moved to Chicago, spent a number of years in Chicago, again in a global role. And then my last role with Sinovate, I was splitting my time between Hong Kong and Chicago. It was then that I decided I was going to take a pivot of my career, and I wanted to get back into more of that kind of core technology, but leverage the international experiences that I had accumulated while at Sinovate, and really bring the best of those worlds together. So international growth with technology. And I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work with 4 really innovative companies, Vision Critical, Medallia, Matterport, and Procore. I was the first hire in region for Vision Critical, Medallia, and Matterport. Medallia, Matterport, and Procore, if you're not familiar, these were our unicorn companies. I was with Medallia on the run-up to their IPO. I was with Matterport through their IPO, and I joined Procore after their IPO. So I also got this opportunity to see high growth companies at different stages in their trajectory and in their growth. That also brought me to to Singapore, which rounds out my 7th country in my list. In between Medallia and Matterport, I actually went off and I set up my own consulting business because I started to realize that there were a number of challenges companies faced when they were going internationally, and in particular to Asia. And I wanted to take this cumulative experience and start to package that up. So rather than just kind of jumping to the next company and helping leading it, I thought I really wanted to do this more as a consultant where I could take this cumulative learning and help companies along the journey. And I've been fortunate to work with 25 or maybe more than 25 companies now at different stages in their needs and their growth. So some were about Asia expansion, others were just in terms of international expansion or had specific opportunities or challenges. So today I'm going to really focus about this kind of cumulative learning that I've developed over 30 plus years now. I'm not going to go through this framework or this process, but I just share this little visual because it's the way I look at things is it's breaking this down into kind of bite-sized pieces, breaking it down into component parts to take the journey of expansion and international or market expansion into kind of manageable pieces. For any of you who are on this journey, who have done this before, you know it's complex. There's a lot of languages, cultures, time zones, currencies, Business decision-making looks different in one market to the other. Market maturities look different. It's a very complex and exciting and dynamic and challenging experience when you're going international. And it's important to keep that in mind, because this isn't often a lift and shift. You may be very successful in one market, but when you go into another market, you want to take some shared learnings, but be very mindful of the fact that it's going to be different. So again, today we've only got a limited time, so I'm not going to go through some of the way I think about this in the detail of the approach and all the component parts. What I want to do, though, is I just want to take one aspect that everybody does when they're expanding internationally. And that one aspect I want to focus on is assumptions. Anytime you're going into a new market, breaking into a new territory, doing anything that's expansion in your business, there are going to be a set of assumptions that you're making. Some of those assumptions are implicit. Some of those are written down, perhaps in a strategy document. Others are going to be possibly hidden away in different functional leads that have particular assumptions that may not be clear to everybody. And these assumptions are going to fit into different categories. There's going to be product assumptions around product market fit. You're going to have assumptions in marketing, but your value proposition, the target audience you're going after. There'll be assumptions with sales in terms of time to revenue, your contract value, the ROI, how you're going to develop pipeline. There's going to be a lot of assumptions on the sales side. Financial and legal, what currencies you're going to accept, the contract law. You're going to have a set of assumptions when you go into any market. And last and definitely not least is around customer support and success. Understanding cultural differences, understanding, if you're only offering certain limitations in language or time zone, there's going to be a set of assumptions that you're making when you go into to an international market or expand. But based on these assumptions, you'll set some goals. You'll set some targets and goals for the business. But then the reality will hit. You're then getting into the market, and the learnings will become real. So what I want to do now is I want to just focus a little bit on when the rubber hits the road, that reality of I'm now in market trying to take this thing forward. And as many of you will know, based on, as I was quickly learning about you before joining in the webinar, it's not a straight path. There is not always a clear way to success. It's going to be fraught with challenges, opportunities, obstacles. So one of the things that I like to do is to get everybody on the same page is I started to put together in kind of this framework or format, questions that you should be asking yourself, the business, to make sure that there's alignment. And I'll just pick out a few. I'm not going to read through this. Things like, when do we expect to be profitable? I like to start with that one, because that's often the glue that ties together funding coming into the business, as well as expectations around when things need to happen. Who are we going to sell to? How are they going to hear about us? Why will they buy? What assumptions are we making around the sales cycle? How long will that be? So it's good to be, I think, very explicit in writing down and documenting a number of these assumptions that you're making, so that you can get greater alignment and tie-up in a cross-functional way across the business. It will also help as you're building your toolkits and your go-to-market content and materials. It will also help to make sure that there's alignment in the organization around that. What I also find then is, you're going to hit some obstacles along the way. So what do you do around closed-loop feedback and bringing everybody together? One thing I would highly recommend is that you formally share the learnings along the way. I far too often hear people say, oh yeah, I have a weekly call with my manager. I have a 20-minute Zoom call, and it's as he's or she is driving home at night and I'm waking up. I would say that's not the best way of doing the closed loop feedback. Make it formal. Make sure that there is a living document, a working document where you can track experiences, the good, the bad, anything that you're feeling, especially around those friction points. And for those of you that got, that spidey sense, the experience that something doesn't feel quite right, those are the things to be marking down, because those are the ones you want to surface early and start getting the organization to help thinking about. And again, focus on those friction points or potential friction points. One thing that's hard for some people, but bad news early is better than bad news late. And getting that surfaced as soon as possible is always going to be a recipe for finding solutions, than trying to delay it and kind of run into those challenges later on. I encourage you and your teams, if you're managing teams that are going internationally, is make sure you get HQ into the region. Often it'll be, well, let's bring our, the one MD into HQ and they'll spend some time learning. And that's good as well. But HQ's also got to get time in market. Not just your boss, but the cross-functional leaders as well. Don't get them all to come out at one time. It's overwhelming and they won't get the value. They'll all have dinners together and they won't realize what great experiences exist in the market. So break that up. I also recommend don't go too early, because if they come in too early, then your assumptions are still just that. They're just assumptions. So you want a few months in the market. You want to have some of those learnings that can be baked into those experiences. Seek outside in multiple perspectives. Talk to customers or customers who rejected your offer. Find out and have lots of conversations and get different perspectives. And then what I want to do is I want to then think about tying that back. So if you go back, and this is where I very rarely do I see companies that take those learnings and then go back and recalibrate and go back and then reset the goals and assumptions. And normally it's not about a hard reset. Normally what I find, it's just the speed in which you're able to accelerate the growth and getting people aligned, saying, look, we're not hitting our quarterly targets, something, but we're going to make the adjustments. We still see that there's a success, but we may need to see that it's going to move at a slightly different pace than we expected. And by the way, in some assumptions, you may understate. It may actually be a target-rich environment. There may be ways in which you want to accelerate the growth. So it's not always a hindrance. It can actually be that you identify some subsegments or target markets that are actually ripe for accelerating your growth. So it doesn't always have to be woe and the challenge. There can be some really good things in that as well. So with that, I want to just share a couple stories to bring this to life a little bit for you all. The first one is one of the companies I worked with is an international B2B SaaS company. A non-core business. So this is not a transactional system. It wasn't a core banking system, an ERP. This is a non-core solution for that business. We went into market, and the story is about a go-to-market pivot. We went in with the idea that we were going to do a direct sale approach. The idea that we also had is that we wanted to do partners, but we didn't have any partner program in place. But we knew that was going to be a key part of success in the future. So the strategy was start direct, and in parallel, we'll build out the channel. What we realized very, very quickly was that while the technology was strong, the reputation in another market was strong, the customers were not willing to invest because they didn't feel comfortable with the customer success. There were no local case studies or local clients. We didn't have that trusted localized experience to offer. But when we went in with our partners, the early stage partners that we saw instantly that there was a bond. They had local credibility. They had boots on the ground, experiences that could be linked in. So very quickly, we went back and said, we need to pivot. We need to change our direction and go to a co-sale motion, and we need to accelerate the whole partner play immediately. Now, this is easier said than done, because as I said, there was no structure in place for a partner program. So I had to work with finance and legal. We had to come up with a compensation plan, not only for the partners, but this was going to impact the direct sales team because we were going to move them into a hybrid co-sale model. So we had to look at the financial impact. We had to build the legal documents. Now, we did this in parallel. This wasn't one where we said, okay, we're going to put pause on this for 4 months and build all this. We knew that there was a 3 to 4 month lead time to selling the solution anyways. So we got that process going while we started to basically keep selling, but we started to build the go-to-market strategy in field. We couldn't wait because we knew if we waited, the cost of doing this was going to be too great. And then customer success. This was another one where we had to then take experiences and best practices with a solution and bake that into the partner network. Now, It started off rough because at the halfway point in the year, we were well behind our targets. There was pressure, but we knew, because we had cross-functional alignment, we knew that this was the path forward. And the great story on this one is that we got to break even 6 months ahead of the original schedule. And this business unit ended up being the fastest to profit of any of the international business units within this organization. Now, I actually have 3 stories, but I'm also mindful of time, and I want to make sure we have also some time for questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to skip story 2, and I'm going to jump to story 3. If we have time, I'll go back to story 2. But I just want to make sure that if there are questions coming in, or maybe Klaus, you can let me know, are there questions coming in on the Slack channel? Because I'll steal 5 more minutes and do an extra story, or I can make sure we have time for Q&A.
It's a good reminder. We don't have any questions coming in right now. So if you have any questions to what Bruce is sharing, please submit your questions, and then we can pull you into the conversation afterwards.
All right. So given that, I will give you story number 2 and then also 3. So this one is about, as you all know, there are different types of employee classifications, right? You have full-time employees, part-time employees, contractors, subcontractors. You can use outsourced suppliers like a BPO, a business process outsourcer. And for many of you who have gone international, you probably have also looked at a PEO. So if you don't have a legal entity set up in a particular market, a PEO can be a great way of actually hiring your full-time staff, but they're actually technically under the employer record is a local agency. But in all intents and purposes, they're still your full-time employees. So there's different classifications here. So this story is another company I was working with. I came in, I was the first hire into the market, and the budget and targets had already been set. So I inherited a budget and a target. And the budget was actually set around a fixed number of headcount, and they were all sales headcount, which was the first little red flag that went up, because I knew customer success was going to be needed this is in Asia, and how to do that. So first thing I did is I went to the CFO and I said, rather than looking at a headcount number, can we look at the headcount budget? And because this business was set up in Singapore, a headcount budget in Singapore gave me quite a lot to play with in terms of being able to look at a hybrid model. So I realigned, rather than hiring that set number of folks, I looked at leveraging that budget in a different way. So we used a PEO in Malaysia, and I put in customer success right from the beginning, rather than having that delivered out of the US. Training and non-English inbound sales, I did through hiring through PEO. I did put the partner manager and outbound sales, and mainly it was enterprise sales, into Singapore. Those were the main full-time headcount that we put in there. Had some others as well, but those are the main ones. Admin and inbound sales in English, I did used a BPO in the Philippines. And by the way, when I set that up, it actually became something that the global head office could use instantly. So they used the admin bench strength that I set up in the Philippines to help me in the region, but it became instantly a global service center that the HQ could use. And then lastly, I used an intern to also help out, because interns was also another cost-effective way to get that initial team. So this was great. I was really excited about this. I had good alignment with finance, sales, channel, everybody. Business is going well. We're accelerating. We're having a great success. We're working our tails off, but it's going well. And rather than just having this small team of just sales folks, I now have really a nice ecosystem of all the skills that we need to grow the business. But there was an unintended consequence to this. So we hit a milestone within the business, and there was a swag package that was sent out to all the employees. And we were going to do this global Zoom call. Everybody was going to be in their swag, and we were going to celebrate the joint success that everybody had created. We get onto the Zoom call, and I noticed that my team in Asia, 80% are not wearing the swag. You can see on their face, they're not kind of connected in. And then I asked afterwards, what happened? Well, we didn't get the swag. Oh, why is that? The HR policy for the swag was for only full-time employees. So even though we had built this great team, and nobody actually saw that there was a difference between an outsourced individual and a BPO. We were all one team. Um, and it was amazing how a few t-shirts and a swag pack just created this rip where it was us and them. And obviously we turned it around. We did some local incentives. We fell on our sword and rectified it. But it was one of these things where how all that energy can just dissipate very quickly over a few t-shirts. So the little things do matter. This is my last slide. I'll end with this one. And this is rather than a story, this is just kind of a reminder or some best practices that I've learned. It's kind of a final tip. So I assume many of you are familiar with Jeffrey Moore's book, Closing the Chasm. Closing the Chasm, right?
Yes.
And it's all about technology adoption, right? So it's the innovators and early adopters who are on that bleeding edge of adopting technology. Then you have your early majority, et cetera. And for most scaling businesses, it's it's getting through these stages, and especially to get to the hyper growth, you got to get over that chasm. And so as you're in your home market, as you've launched and get started, you're going through that process. I want to remind you all that when you go and you're scaling internationally, remember what it was like when you started out, because actually your international markets are not an acceleration of that same growth curve. They're going back to those innovators. And so often I see companies that make this mistake where they think, hey, we've got a great brand. We're doing really well in our home market. Let's go international, and forget the fact that you won't have the support structures in place. You may not have product market fit. You'll have many of the same challenges you had when you started out. And you're really going to have to go and find those innovators and early adopters who are willing to work with the fact that you don't have everything. You don't have local support. You don't have the language capabilities. There may be some feature gaps. I think it's one step that I see too many companies make. When I go back to those assumptions, they make the assumption that they can kind of start at this part in the curve rather than the beginning of that curve. And so I also look at your TAM, SAM, SOM. I'm sure people have done these analysis. They're good. They're indicators. They point you in the right direction. But my recommendation when you're starting out and breaking into a new market is there's I don't know if it's SOM 2.0 or SOM 0.2, but you probably only have 2.5 to 5% of that available attainable market that's truly in your vision for that first year or 2 years until you get to that point. I'll end. There's a whole thing on investment. Early investment, late investment. I see a lot of companies that go out to markets and they're like, well, let's put 1 or 2 people in market. Let's see how it goes. If it goes well, we'll put more in. Usually that's a recipe for disaster because you're not thinking through it from the customer lens. And then there's the other side where like, oh yeah, we're going to accelerate this. We've got some funding. Let's just go. And then that can put stress in where you may be overinvested and it puts an unnecessary amount of stress into the organization. So maybe there's a separate webinar just around investment balance, but not for today. I'll end with this. Obviously, this is about being agile, being resilient, collaborative. Growth is a team sport. Don't do this in isolation. Make sure that you're communicating, you're vulnerable, be open when you make mistakes, and we all have, or I certainly have made my share. Be vulnerable with those mistakes and seek collaboration on trying to get to the outcomes that you want. So with that, I'll end the formal part of the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bruce. I appreciate it. There was some very good topics here, all the way from cross-functional alignment to the little things matters. Don't forget the t-shirts to people who are not necessarily registered as full-time employees at the company, but through PEOs, to also finding innovators. Before we sort of put it on to the audience to kind of ask some questions,